So we just kind of talked about the president's plan for Reconstruction. We had President Johnson's plan, kind of that 10% plan, kind of soft on the South. But I know the fat lady has not sung on the issue of who is in charge of Reconstruction, because Congress wants to be in charge of Reconstruction. Okay, so here we go. Section G, Congressional Reconstruction. So to the disgust of the North, congressmen in 1865 start appearing from the South. So the southern states under Johnson's 10% plan are now states, so they send congressmen to Washington, D.C. And more or less what the North's Congress did is they shut the door in the face of the Southern congressmen, because in their minds, their excuse was that the Southern states were in civil disorder during those congressional elections, so that those elections were invalid. So 1865, the Northern congressmen shut the door in the face of the Southern congressmen. Okay, they had some other ideas. We have to remember during the Civil War that Republicans in Congress had the majority, so they enjoyed a time, if you could say enjoy is the word, of not having to compromise with the Southern Democrats. So we see a lot of bills passed during the Civil War that more or less had Republicans stamped right on their foreheads. We see the Morrill Tariff, which was an increase in a tariff. Remember, increased tariffs is like a hallmark of Republicans. They want to protect U.S. industry. We also see the Homestead Act, which parceled out that western land fairly cheaply for those homesteaders. We also see the Pacific Railroad Act. Pacific Railroad Act helped fund the construction of the Union Pacific Transcontinental Railroad by giving money for land grants, government bonds, that sort of thing. So during the Civil War, they had gotten their say, and they were not eager to have to start compromising with the South again. Also remember, when the South re-enters the Union, they actually are more powerful than ever, politically speaking, because now that, slaves are free, they're not considered 3/5 of a person anymore, like the Constitution had them. They're now 5/5 of a person. So now the population of the South increases, and with that increased population, they have an increased number of members in the House of Representatives. But not even that. Not only do they have more people in the House, that equates to more votes in the Electoral College. So they have more say in who's going to be president, because they have, 12 more votes in the Electoral College. So the North was, they had a lot of reasons to be kind of scared of the South coming back into Congress. They're afraid they're going to repeal all those Republican bills they had passed during the Civil War. And they're afraid that if the Northern Democrats kind of join forces with the South, that, they could really elect whoever they wanted for president. They could perhaps have control over one or both houses in Congress. They could repeal all of those acts. So, the North was very hesitant to allow the South to bring back congressmen. Okay, so next section, Section 8. Johnson clashes with Congress. Something we'll see is that Johnson, during his tenure, during his reign, he vetoes a bunch of stuff. Because remember, Johnson is this Democrat sitting, surrounded by all of these Republicans. So Johnson, we'll see a lot of times, will veto a lot of bills passed by Republican Congress. Okay? But we'll also see Congress overriding the vetoes of Johnson. Okay? Because remember, if the president vetoes a bill, it's sent back to Congress, and if Congress can come up with 2/3 majority, that bill can become law even if the president vetoes it. Okay? So, for example, Johnson vetoes a bill extending the life of the Freedmen's Bureau, and Congress overrides the veto, and it passes anyway. A huge bill that Congress passes over Johnson's veto is the Civil Rights Bill. Okay? The Civil Rights Bill, in effect, they wanted to counteract the black codes by giving blacks citizenship and making it a crime to take away blacks' rights to sue, to hold property, to testify in courts. You know, they really just wanted to protect the South, the blacks in the South, against all of these black codes that were coming out. Okay, like I said, Johnson vetoes it. And Congress, you know, passes it over the veto, but Congress is thinking here, and they're like, well, Johnson doesn't like it. That probably means for sure, you know, the South's not going to like it. So once the South's congressmen start, you know, coming back into Congress, what, you know, prevents the South from getting rid of the Civil Rights Act and, you know, perpetuating the black codes even nationally? Nothing. So what they decide to do is they decide to make the civil rights law into an amendment to the Constitution, because amendments are a whole lot harder to get rid of than bills. So that's what they do. They change the Civil Rights Law, or Civil Rights Act, or Civil Rights Bill, whatever you want to call that, Civil Rights Bill, into what we have today, the 14th Amendment. So here's specifically what the 14th Amendment includes, okay? One, it gave citizenship, but not the right to vote, to blacks. So they kind of had the same status as women. Women were citizens, but they couldn't vote. All right. They threatened to take away state representation if states denied blacks the vote. Three, it said Confederate leaders who had held office before the Civil War were disqualified from holding federal office again. And then finally it said it made sure that the national government wouldn't take responsibility for any of those debts the South had incurred during the Civil War. So really, 14th Amendment, Civil Rights Amendment, extended civil rights to freemen and protected the South, protected them from the South taking away those rights. Excellent. Section I, swinging around the circle with Johnson. So, Johnson knew that the election of 1866 was coming up. However, the election of 1866 was a congressional election, and Johnson was more than eager to get a couple more congressmen kind of on his side, who would be soft on the South. So what he did is, on his way to Chicago, and on his way back to Chicago, he made a lot of stops to speak, a lot of speaking stops. It's kind of the swing around the circle. Okay, he's going to Chicago to dedicate a statue of Stephen Douglas. So on his way there and on his way back, he stops and makes a lot of speeches, trying to get people to vote for congressmen who would be on his side. But it backfires, because when he would stop and he would have these speeches, you know, people would heckle him. People would throw insults at him, but instead of ignoring them, you know, whatever, he actually started shouting right back at the crowd. So, you know, the presidency was sinking to a new low. So, like I said, the swing around the circle backfires for Johnson. So, as a result of the 1866 congressional election, we actually see Republicans gaining more seats. Okay, so by 1866 election, when all is said and done, there is a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate of Republicans. So now officially, Congress is veto-proof. Johnson could veto every single bill, but it wouldn't matter, because Congress had enough Republicans in it to override any veto. So the question was before, you know, is it going to be Congress or the president who's in charge of piecing that vase back together? It's now definitely 100% the Congress. You know, Johnson has his wings clipped. All right, so when we're talking about, let's talk about the next section here, Section J, Republican Principles and Programs. We're going to kind of look here at who were the Republicans in Congress we've been talking about anyway. So the Republicans kind of had two groups, okay? They had a group of radical Republicans, and they were in the minority. They were very loud, they were very vocal, but they were in the minority. And then we have kind of more moderate Republicans. Let's first focus on the radicals. There was kind of two big names when it came to radical Republicans. One was in the Senate. In the Senate, our big radical Republican was Charles Sumner. Sumner had been the guy who was beaten up in Senate. You know, he had been caned in the head. Well, he's healthy now, and he's back full force. So he's kind of the head of the Senate for the radical Republicans. And then we have Thaddeus Stevens kind of leading the radical Republican charge in the House. Thaddeus Stevens, very interesting character. He's 74 years old at the time, was a lawyer who had defended runaway slaves for free. He insisted that when he died that he would be buried in a black cemetery. Okay, you know, he was known to have a black mistress, all of this stuff. So, you know, those are the two big radical Republicans. You know, they really hated the whites in the South, and they really wanted to, you know, make sure that the South was transformed, both politically, economically, socially, before they would be reinstated in the North, right, into the Union, I should say. Okay. Moderates, like their name would tell us, they're a little bit more moderate, okay? They wanted to make sure that the rights of the blacks were protected, but they weren't as willing to go quite as far as the radical Republicans in ensuring that. Okay, the moderates were like, you know, we're never a huge fan of a lot of direct federal intervention anyway, so the moderates were more or less, maybe not so harsh. Okay? But in the end, you know, congressional Reconstruction plans kind of show a mixture of the radicals and Republicans together. You know, they didn't agree on everything, but one thing they knew for sure is they wanted to make sure that blacks were enfranchised, or made sure that blacks, at least guys, had the right to vote. Next section, Section K, Reconstruction by the sword. Okay, so this is what actually happens here. Okay, this is the plan here. The Reconstruction Act, March 2nd, 1867, it is passed, and this is what it does. It divides the South into 5 military districts, and each district is under the command of a Union general and is policed by Union soldiers. So, very harsh, it would seem, okay? You know, and under the Reconstruction Act, Congress says, forget about Johnson's 10% plan. That wasn't right. This is what you need to do to re-enter the Union under our terms. 1, you had to ratify or approve the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment was the one, of course, that was the Civil Rights Amendment. And 2, you had to have in your state constitution something that guarantees former adult male slaves full suffrage, or the right to vote. So you have to make sure that male slaves can vote, former male slaves can vote, and also that they ratify the 14th Amendment. All right, so, you know, although states, you know, to enter the Union had to have in their constitution that blacks can vote, Republicans in Congress, they just don't trust them, okay, because they're afraid that as soon as, you know, South Carolina entered the Union again, the first thing South Carolina as a state would do would be to amend their state constitutions and take away freedmen's right to vote. So once again, Congress Republicans decide to make another amendment to ensure that blacks could vote, and that is the 15th Amendment. Okay, 15th Amendment ensures or prohibits states from denying anyone the right to vote based on race. All right. So here we go. The 5 military districts. It's kind of harsh, and it also kind of smells a little unconstitutional, if you know what I mean, okay? A peacetime military presence kind of seems against the spirit of the Constitution, but really the Supreme Court at this time really wanted to avoid offending the Republicans in Congress, so we really see the Supreme Court kind of looking the other way when it comes to this Reconstruction Act. The only thing the Supreme Court really mentions or decides on is just one Supreme Court case, 1866 case, Ex parte Milligan, and that's a Supreme Court case that ruled that military tribunals couldn't be used to try civilians if civil courts were open. So other than this one civil rights case, or one Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court is quiet, just lets it slide. Okay. So by 1870, all states were officially rejoined to the Union as put forth in the terms by Congress. Okay, but just like the Republicans had feared, as soon as the federal troops were withdrawn from the states kind of flipped. Okay, the states before had these, pleasant, wonderful constitutions that were totally in line with what the North wanted. They had Republicans in office, all of this stuff. But as soon as those federal troops left, they made a 180. Okay, they kind of kicked out the Republicans and voted in all Democrats. All right, and these Democrats had a title or a name. They were called Redeemers. Okay, so just to reemphasize that, Redeemers are Southern Democrats who took the place of Republican regimes in the South after Reconstruction. Okay. Last section for this video, section L, no women voters. Okay, so to recap, we've had 3 fairly huge amendments in this chapter so far in Reconstruction. Right, 13th, 14th, 15th. 13th Amendment gave slaves or abolished slavery. 13th Amendment got rid of slavery. 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment, that Civil Rights Amendment, okay, protecting the rights of the blacks, especially against those black codes that were appearing in the South. 14th Amendment. 15th Amendment then was guaranteeing blacks the right to vote. So 13th, ending slavery. 14th, protecting blacks' rights. 15th, giving blacks the right to vote, okay, in simplified terms. Okay, so this is where, the abolitionists were happy. They were ecstatic. This is what they've been working for so long, those abolitionists. I mean, they were ecstatic. However, some were quite disappointed in the fact that women were not given the right to vote right along with the blacks in that 15th Amendment. Because to a lot of women, the abolitionist movement and the women's movement had been so connected, so intertwined, that it was kind of mind-blowing to them that an amendment including or giving blacks the right to vote didn't include women. Okay, for an example of how women had been so involved in abolitionist movement, we have something called the Women's Loyal League. Okay, this was a women's organization that had been formed to bring an end to the Civil War, but also to encourage Congress to pass a constitutional amendment to prohibit slavery. I mean, they had gathered nearly 400,000 signatures. So women had a huge role in the abolitionist movement, and they were so disappointed when they didn't get the right to vote. We have, remember, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony. They had campaigned their hearts out to make sure that women were included in the 15th Amendment, but in the end, women would have to wait another 50 years until the 19th Amendment finally gave them the right to vote. And with that, I think that is enough for this video.